Pessoal do show Zona Curva, estamos aqui com uma das lendas, em especial da música eletrônica, vanguardista. Tem toda uma história que vem lá dos anos 60 e segue até hoje na atividade. Pessoal do Tangerine Dream, I want to thank you guys for the interview, to be here with me. And the first thing I want for you guys to introduce yourself, how do you start in music, and for how long you've been in the band?
Thank you for having us. Thanks so much for the interest. My name is Thorsten Questioning, and I'm with Tangerine Dream since 20 years now. Started 2003. For me, it's a long time. So I never did anything for as long as Tangerine Dream. So before I had kind of a goth rock, progressive rock, a little classic background, producing and playing some kind of darker music in Berlin. And Edgar searched for a person who could do studio stuff, play live, play synths. And after 2 years in the studio, or 1.5 years, we started composing together. And so I joined Tangerine Dream first time 2005 on stage and as composer and member, and but started composing for the albums in 2004. I think the term is quite difficult, but after Edgar sadly passed away in 2015, which is 8 years now. It's called, music director, but I was music director since 2011. There was a cooperation with Brian May from Queen on Tenerife. It worked quite well. Normally I'm doing my solo stuff is also electronic. I'm doing things with Schiller, which is a German artist in the same genre. With Tangerine Dream, we also do collaborations with Jean-Michel Jarre, Brian May, and things like this.
My name is Paul Frick. I am still very new in the band. I officially joined not even 3 years ago. I have a background from mostly, let's say, contemporary classical music. So I studied classical composition, which is where I met Thorsten roughly more than 20 years ago, but just like small talk in the cafe of the conservatory. I started like a band, a trio with 2 other people. I mean, we started together 15 years ago. It's called Brandbauer Frick. Then when I met Thorsten again, by coincidence at a radio show in Berlin, Radio 1, with Olaf Zimmermann. We met again and then realized we had already met before. We looked completely different. And we got along very well, and somehow it happened after we also tried out making music together a little bit that I got invited as a guest and was then asked to join the band after a few gigs, which I'm very happy about, and now we're here.
Tangerine Dream music sometimes is described as electronic, ambient, or experimental. What do you think about those terms?
At the end of the day, it's electronic made music. So if it's ambient, electronica, bad terms like crowd rock, doesn't matter at the end of the day what people are calling us. We're just doing our music. And even it's not experimental or some people say it's experimental. I think real experimental music should not be experimental for the guy who's doing it. It should feel natural to him. It would be kind of weird to do something strange, but it's not authentic. So you should do the music out of your soul, out of your brain, out of your hands, and then this is going to be the music you're doing. So Tangerine Dream, we have kind of a long heritage since first gig was in 1967. First album 70. The idea behind the music, philosophical background behind the music, why you're doing things, which scales you should use. There are even rules for step sequences which step should be repeated many times. But Edgar has done this for nearly 50 years, and out of this kind of heritage and knowledge. So it's like a teacher and pupil situation. I was living there in his house for years. And I don't come especially from electronic music, so I learned everything I now know about electronic music from Edgar himself. I've never programmed a sequencer bassline before. So I learned by the master himself, if you like, because he's the sequencer guy. So it's, how do you call it? Electronica is probably better than if you keep it straight. So it's not electro. We don't use the 808 snare, but it's maybe too small or too tiny. So it's electronic music, made music. If you call it ambient electronica, electronic music, psychedelic music, it's all fine for us.
I want to ask you about your creative process. In 2022, you guys released Traum.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, this means space or
Space.
room, something.
Okay. It's different for you to make those compositions for a soundtrack or for an album from the band itself. How it works for you?
So it was first shared composition, and it was kind of strange things because of the pandemic. It was totally a different point of view and kind of a working process, different kind of working process. Normally, you go on studio and then getting interrupted by concerts or festivals somewhere, like now. And so we had 1.5 years just in studio, but without the opportunity to test it live with an audience. So it was just focusing on every single note and every single EQ, but kind of in closed circle without being interrupted or just talk to other people because it wasn't loud, more hermetic than ever.
What you guys listen on a daily basis right now? What you're listening?
It's hard to pick anything. One thing I always come back to forever is basically like classical music that I grew up with. I must confess, it sounds very boring, but I'm a bit of a sucker for Mozart. The last years, I started to listen to a lot of great, interesting radio programs, like of course NTS radio. I really love Do You radio, which I listen every morning. And that's something I never really did before. Now I also like to discover things by chance more. But other than that, yes, I will maybe have a week where I listen constantly to very old jazz, and then a week where I listen to Kendrick Lamar or something like that. So, yeah.
Sounds much better than my answer. So I'm much more simplified in it. So probably this morning I heard Disintegration from The Cure.
Sure.
So it's always fine to get a chilly mood and kind of.
That's your Mozart.
That's my Mozart. Robert Smith is my Mozart, and kind of Godspeed Your Black Emperor is a band I'm very much adore. Post rock. I don't like the term post punk because it's The Cure. So, sometimes, yeah, Sigur Rós.
Amazing, Sigur Rós live. It's amazing. How do you guys describe your live concerts? For a person like me, that will be the first time. There will be. How can you describe the experience of the concert?
Well, usually it's divided in two parts, you may say. First, there's quite a lot of Tangerine Dream pieces from all decades, except the 90s. And usually then after an hour 40 or 2 hours, then we go off stage and bow, and then we start a session, which is depending on how much time we have, which is usually 30 or 40 minutes, or if we have more time, then more. I find it very exciting, also unusual, to first play pieces that are pretty much defined and that we wouldn't want to change too much, because they're compositions that, you know, everything that was before your time, none of us wrote it. So, you know, of course we reinterpret them sonically a bit different, but it needs to stay the piece itself. And then in the end there comes the total freedom, which is just different every night. And we only agree, or usually the chief just says, let's do a certain BPM and a certain ground tonality, and then we just start. And that's exciting. Unfortunately, tomorrow at our show there won't be the time for the session, which I find is a huge pity. Nobody's to blame, but there's just not enough time for it, because it would be a pity not to play any actual Tangerine Dream song.
Sure.
Or piece, I would say. Some are songs, but it's rather pieces. So yeah, this division is very characteristic into that. You know, it's not just purely a museum. It always tries to hint into what we're interested in, inspired in right now, or by the response of the people. It can get very physical, but it can also stay very ethereal.
Do you think the Tangerine Dream nowadays, it's a reincarnation of the band, or do you think it's a natural flow to keep the band and the music going on through decades?
So it's the same band. So
Okay.
it's not a reincarnation. So,
Sure.
So it's a kind of a natural process. The idea was always to move on and to morph into something different. So there are more than 100 albums, and if you listen to the first and probably the 15th, you probably would say this is a different band. But if you listen from album to another, there's a kind of a red line between us. So it's everlasting, evolving progress from kind of untidy noise, which is not my term. I wouldn't say that, but Edgar said, to more clean tonality with structures, and then a combination of all things you learned before. Anything else would be sad. So you are learning with every note you're playing and every song you compose or track you compose. And so it's a combination of everything at the end. Or nowadays. So I think the good thing about Tangerine Dream is that the concept, which is something Peter Bowman also said, is stronger than all people involved. So the idea is to have the emotions of 3 people transferred to instruments and computers and sequences, but with the strengths of every single individual involved every time, and every new person has got a new impact on the direction Tangerine Dream should go.
With this in mind, do you think that probably in the future you guys gonna pass the torch on and the concept will keep moving on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think this could be really great with this new technology that we have nowadays. How do you think that these new technologies, those environments, do you think it's gonna be impact the future of the band?
I think that technologies should be always a tool which makes things easier, but you can't get things that are more important, conversations between us. So the intention why you should serve music more than probably yourself could be never a computer program. And things like this are much more important than artificial intelligence, which could make average tonality of everything.
But you think it can help for the composition process?
It helps, like
Definitely.
a tool. Tools are interesting.
I mean, in all the equipment and electronic music instruments that we use, and especially that you use, in a way there is a lot of artificial intelligence in it.
Yeah.
And even like in nowadays music software, you have many aspects that help you in a way. We are probably from a generation like being in our 40s where we still so far prefer to just be humans making music. But yes, especially as technology and development of technology has played a big part in Tangerine Dream, it's definitely sensitive to stay open to that. And I think even like in the process of making new music, we cannot avoid having references to the legacy of Tangerine Dream, and it would be really weird if it didn't have that. Everybody would be just very disappointed and maybe rightfully say this is not Tangerine Dream anymore, you know. But the great thing is that we can hear in all these like decades of discography many things that have been tried by various formations of Tangerine Dream that were at the time still technologically limited, where nowadays we can see, that was the idea nowadays. Well, if they had known what we have nowadays, and then we can kind of could take it some steps further if we're lucky. You can definitely find many great ideas in the old records where if you think about how they did it, you can feel the limitations. And in terms of music equipment, we definitely go to the most modern technology as well, especially this man who has just a crazy knowledge about it. So it's definitely never about like recreating a certain retro sound.
Absolutely, but tools are not creativity. So you should be creative is one way and tools another. So I think artificial intelligence being creative is not the idea. Use it as tools to get as near as the sound you hear in your head or brain. Is probably the quest for life.
Sure.
With a certain, let's say, aesthetic aim, we are using artificial intelligence. I mean, for example, if you are creating a certain harmonic noise and you are telling parameters to shift in a certain way and maybe using a random function, that's not very far away from it, but then it has kind of your own aesthetic aim. Classical music of the 20th century, a lot of like interesting, let's say, statistic thinking has been applied by Jürgen Ligeti, for example. It's not artificial intelligence, even though it is a bit of an It's more like machine learning. It's not the same as human intelligence, but it's not complete, even though now it seems like an explosion with ChatGPT and so on. Like the way to there has been very long, and many people have already thought like that before having the means to do it.
I'm really curious to know how the band's going to perform on spaces like metaverse and things like that. Do you have an idea to do something for those environments?
Yeah, we're offers, but kind of probably we're waiting a little.
Okay.
So, yeah. So
To see what happened.
yeah. So must be something special, I guess. So that everything should be not right on the nose. So
Sure.
yeah.
Not to be just like everybody's doing
Yeah.
it. Do you have a new album in mind? What's your goals for the?
We just released the box set with
Okay.
the last UK tour in March 22. We call it session because it's kind of the last half an hour for 40 minutes. It's kind of a real-time composition between something like improvisation, real-time composition, but it's not. We call it session. So it's an 8 CD box with 16 sessions from the UK tour. It was released 2 months ago. Plans for the new studio album should be, so it could be, but there's no promise. Something can happen. We see it probably autumn or fall 24.
Guys, there's something that I should ask that I didn't ask, and you guys want to say to our audience in Brazil?
We want to say, please book us to Brazil. We
That's the last question.
Tell all your friends about us. Then we say muito obrigado. We are absolutely ready to go back to Brazil. I listened to the album Raum. That's kind of the newest sonic incarnation of Tangerine Dream, and see if you like it.
For me, it's a pleasure to talk with you guys. I'm going to the concert, not hope, but I also hope to see you guys playing in Brazil.
Thank you very much for having us.
No, thank you for your opportunity, and I hope you have a great South by and great concert tomorrow.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.